Loving every minute of it.
And there you go. Martin Necas back in the fold, as I told you a long time ago. Hi, everyone. It's the Canes Corner podcast, Martin Necas edition. I don't know if this is the 88th podcast of the, it's not the 88th podcast in the season. We've done a lot more than 88. Anyway, we're brought to you by the Aluminum Company of North Carolina. If it's for the exterior of your home, you can find it at the Aluminum Company of North Carolina on Hamlin Road in Durham. No place like it. Sammy Hanna and his crew do a great job. You should check them out for all of your exterior home improvement needs. Proud to have them still on board. All right, let's, we're not going to spend a ton of time here. There's really only two major issues to get to. Although actually a third, when you consider what the Hurricanes did today with Eric Staal. And I'll get to that, I promise. If I don't, somebody mention it in the comments. You can always jump on board and leave a comment, and we'll get to them as we can. So let's talk about 2 years, $6.5 million annual average or average annual value for Martin Necas. And look, this was always going to be the outcome. You go back to the lead up to the draft, the lead up to free agency, when the Hurricanes were trying to figure out Jake Guentzel. And they tried to get Guentzel. Maybe didn't do it the right way. Maybe didn't do it fast enough. And ultimately they lost Jake Guentzel. But initially the plan was sign Guentzel, trade Necas for futures. And when that fell through, and it doesn't mean that they couldn't have also kept Necas, but as we're seeing here, the math was never going to work out for that. Well, I guess it could have. Hurricanes would have had to have gone much cheaper in other areas, and I don't think they wanted to do that. So the math was never going to work out. It was either going to be Guentzel or Necas. As it turns out, it ends up being Necas. But once the Guentzel thing falls through, there was really no other path forward for Carolina than to re-sign Martin Necas, and they did that. So again, $6 million this year, $7 million next year. The finances are the finances, and we'll get to the impact on Seth Jarvis in a couple of minutes. But let's just talk about Necas. All we heard, basically leading up to the draft, leading through free agency was Necas is, the relationship is irreparable. Necas is unhappy. He doesn't want to be here. He wants out, demands a trade. Dad says, wants to be on the top power play unit, all of that. So Don Waddell and Rod Brindamore addressed it at the press conference to announce Rod Brindamore's contract extension. And that was, dads are going to be dads. I said at the time, I've been saying throughout, I didn't buy really any of that. I'm not saying that there wasn't frustration. There clearly was. Necas didn't necessarily think his role on the team was appreciated, if you will. I'll just use that. But ultimately, as I've tried to explain to a lot of people, and I've had great interactions with everybody on Twitter today, at AGoldFan, if you want to ever send me a comment. In that, when you look at, why wasn't he on the top power play unit? And we can get to the numbers in a second. There were a lot of guys that were, Carolina had two legitimate units. Remember when they at the deadline also brought in Yevgeny Kuznetsov, who's of course no longer with the Hurricanes. But you've got Aho and Jarvis. This is not in any particular order, although I'm giving you the top two guys. Are Aho, Jarvis, Svechnikov, Teravainen, Guentzel. At one point, it was Bunting. So it's one or the other, and they were both on the power play unit, and Bunting was good on the power play. You had Steph Nason. So there's like 7 forwards for 8 forward spots, and then you throw in a Jack Drury or whoever else was. At times there was Jesperi Kotkaniemi, not that he's a major power play guy, but there were so many options on the top for the top unit, you couldn't fit 7 forwards for 4 spots. So we get caught up in, why wasn't he in the top power play unit? He was in the top power play unit 2 years ago, and he had all these points, and he did. He had 26 power play points, which I think led the Hurricanes the previous year. This year, that number was like 13. It was 8 goals, 5 assists, something like that. Maybe it was 60. I don't know, whatever it was. It was significantly lower. Notice the goals are about the same because 2 years ago he had 9 goals. This year he had 24 goals and 53 points. Last year he had 28 goals and 71 points. Much worse year offensively. We'll dig into that in a sec. But the Hurricanes are the second best power play in the NHL. Second best in the entire league. And Necas was put on the second unit because there was no the guy who was going to quarterback that second unit, Brady Shea, wasn't necessarily an entry machine. And Martin Necas was a one-man entry. So when Rod decided to put Necas there, he put him there for a reason. Now, the second unit at times was the better unit. Maybe that's because of Necas, or I don't know. But we have completely lost the plot when it comes to, he needs to be first power play. Like, there were 2 pretty good units. He was part of one of the best power plays during the regular season in the NHL. Hurricanes were, they might have finished the year at like 28%. I mean, it's insane. So let's just dispel that he was getting disrespected by being on the second power play unit. He led Carolina in even strength, 5-on-5, rather. 5-on-5 ice time. Among forwards, Necas, number 1. Aho, number 2. At even strength, which incorporates 4-on-4 time, as well as overtime, he was slightly behind Aho, but he was second among forwards. The difference was that Necas got no penalty kill time, which 3 years ago he got. He was actually 6th on Carolina in shorthanded time on ice among forwards. And he didn't get as much time because the top unit clearly got more time on the power play. But again, certainly not disrespected in that way. Because if that's what we believe, then we believe that Rod Brind'Amour doesn't want to win. I think Rod has proven this. In fact, how often, and the irony here is that the only answer is Necas. How often does Rod bench players? We're talking about skaters for playing poorly. How often does he do that? The answer is barely ever in 6 years as a head coach. In fact, as I said, the only example I can come up with of a player getting benched, like getting his ice time taken away, we're talking about the top, your scorers for poor play, was Necas. But that was like 4 years ago in Florida when Necas made a couple of boneheaded plays early in the third period, got his ice time taken away. I don't think he played at all in the last 8 minutes, but Carolina got to overtime, and Necas ended up factoring in on the game-winning goal. So it didn't last very long. I speak to the head coach enough. I know how he feels about Necas. He wants Necas to be great. And Rod sees a path for Marty to be that way, and that path starts with an attention to detail on the defensive side of the game, which this was the difference between Necas this year and last year. This year, Necas was a poor defensive player. Last year, he was an okay defensive player. Nobody is asking him to be a Selke Award contender. That would be the better word there. Nobody's asking for that. But what we ask is that Necas doesn't lose focus on the defensive side of the puck, especially now since Carolina, in terms of dynamic forwards, the cupboard is not as stocked as it was. Teravainen gone. Nason gone. Not that Nason is dynamic, but he's part of the scoring mechanism, right? Bunting or Gensel, both out the door. So there are pieces missing. Now Kuznetsov no longer here. There are pieces from last year and the year before and the year before that. There are pieces missing. And Martin Necas is going to be relied upon to fill a number of voids. So all of that power play stuff, all of the dad says he wants this and wants that, like, this is typical. I'm not knocking it. It is typical, 25-year-old kid wants to be great, frustration, because during the regular season this year, it didn't go as well as it had in the past. But let me explain something to you about the numbers. If you dig into it, other than the fact that this year, his lines, and it's not all him, by the way, allowed a few too many chances than they had in the past. And I remember when Kuznetsov came over at the deadline of the deal from Washington, we thought, oh my gosh, isn't Kuznetsov, Svechnikov, and Necas, aren't they made for each other? And they didn't play a ton together, but they probably played, 6, 7, 8 games, and it was a disaster. It was a mess. They were atrocious defensively together. And they didn't stay together as a result. But the regular season, the points would have been very similar to a year ago. We understand, defensively, Necas wasn't as good this year as he was the previous year. And again, he wasn't amazing the previous year, but he was okay. He was good enough. The real difference in Necas in terms of point production this year was that the assists were down. Go back 2 years, 28 goals, 43 assists. This year, 24 goals, 29 assists. He missed 5 games with injury. But it was the assists that were down. Did Necas, the shooting percentage was basically the same. So is that a Necas problem? Or is it a problem where the guys he was playing with, a lot of times Jesperi Kotkaniemi, a lot of times Jack Drury, in the playoffs, it was Jordan Martinook. This is not the playoffs, and he rarely played with Martinook during the season. Or was it sort of bad luck? Like, offensively, I don't think there was really any difference in Marty Necas this year as opposed to last year. Again, goals were basically the same. 1.1 goals per 60 minutes. The last 2 years combined. Each of the last 2 years. So the goal output was about the same. It was the assists that took a hit. And I'm going to say, I don't really think that was a Necas problem. I'm not saying it's anybody's fault. In many ways, these things are circumstance. That second assist that a lot of guys pile up. Is it a pass that leads to a goal, or is it a shot attempt that comes off and then somebody else makes a pass? You understand what I'm saying. I don't think there was a big difference offensively between Necas 2 years ago and Necas last year. Now, here's what I do believe from Martin Necas, and I've been saying this for weeks. What he really craves is responsibility. What he really craves is to be relied upon. The head coach has already talked to him about it. I need you. We need you. And especially once that Gensel deal fell apart, it was always going to come back to here. The team needs Martin Necas. They need his ability. They need his scoring. They need his playmaking. They need his speed. They need his dynamic playmaking ability. They need the fear factor of, oh my, here's 88 flying down the right side or moving through the neutral zone or circling the offensive zone on the power play or whatever it is. They need that, desperately need that, because, to bring in another sports analogy, you need big bats in the middle of your lineup. And you've got Aho, you've got Jarvis, you've got Svechnikov, and we need that bat to get bigger. And we need Necas. Do they need other players to also step up their offense? Yes, but that's not for this podcast. We'll get to that another time. But it is a huge opportunity for Martin Necas this year to become that guy. I do believe the team was serious. They would have loved to have done 8 years, but the truth of the matter is that it's hard to know what to pay him. I mean, if I were Necas, I would never do 8 years at $6.5 million, because what if Marty becomes, and I think this is possible for him, what if he becomes a point a game guy? What if he becomes a 30 goal, 50 assist guy? He's going to play a ton. And he's going to get shorthanded time, I think. At least he'll get the opportunity to do that. So if you're a 75-ish point a game player, $6.5 million, I mean, that's on the low end, especially with the cap going up. So it wasn't in Necas' best interest to do a long-term deal right now. And honestly, the Hurricanes aren't sure what Martin Necas is ultimately. So 1 year didn't do it for me. I don't think this was ever good. I never thought this would get to arbitration, although the most recent comments made it seem like it was headed for arbitration. But I always thought the team wanted to get it done. I always thought Necas wanted to get it done. 2 years is actually excellent. I know it walks up to free agency. I think that's an overblown thing. Two reasons why. One, if it doesn't work, if it might be Necas, it might be the team, in terms of maybe the team isn't playing well enough and maybe they're not going to make the playoffs. I think they're a playoff team. And I think most people believe they're a playoff team. Vegas believes they're a playoff team. They are minus 250. I think minus 250 might even be better to make the playoffs. They have a 75% chance of making the playoffs, according to the Desert. But because it's a 2-year deal at a reasonable cap number, when we get to the trade deadline, if both sides decide that, well, this probably needs to be, we need to move on from this, it's a very movable contract because of the second year, because it's not a rental. Somebody's going to get essentially 2 playoff runs with Necas. I say this not because I think it will happen, only that it would make it easier if it turns out to not be working for both sides. But I believe that these 2 years are the precursor to a much longer relationship between the Hurricanes and Martin Necas, and that going through all of these things ultimately will be good. Again, I think the head coach absolutely loves the player. I think he wants Necas to be, when you see that kind of talent, you want that talent to take advantage of it. And Necas, especially if you look at the way he played in the playoffs, like, I think 9 points in 11 games, which is, by the way, the same thing Seth Jarvis had, was probably the lowest possible point total his performance could have put out. Like, he played much better than 9 points in 11 games, in my opinion. And I think part of that was who he was playing with. And I'm not saying he's going to play with Jack Drury and Jordan Martinook in this upcoming season, because he's not. But that line, the way it was deployed in the playoffs, was a super effective line. So I am bullish on Necas' future with the Hurricanes. I am bullish on Necas this year. And again, we're not going to really worry about first unit, second unit power play, because I'm just not sure there's a second unit. 4 forwards and a D, right? Aho, Jarvis, Necas, Svechnikov, Shane Gostisbehere. There's your power play unit. Brent Burns will get some power play time, I'm sure, on the second unit. I don't know who's going to join him on it. I really don't. So I think there will be certain players who can sub in on a second unit. That's the difference this year. There's not, you can't make a wholesale change 5 for 5 as they did a year ago. Now they might have two different, point, guys at the top of the point. Defenseman quarterbacking the power play. Sometimes it'll be Burns. I would think first choice would be Gostisbehere, but I think the four forwards are pretty much going to be static. Again, maybe your high scoring and offensive rookie makes the team and he gets some power play time, and you can use Kokaniemi and Drury and who knows who else. But for the most part, I think we're going to see one power play unit get most of the time, which, by the way, if you watched in the playoffs, a lot of teams do that. Anyway, so that's where we are with Necas. Now, how does it impact Seth Jarvis? So I think a simple one. We now know exactly what the Hurricanes have in terms of available cap space. And that number is more than enough to even overpay Seth Jarvis. So I did the math. I tried to do it very quickly on Monday after the Necas contract was announced, and I wasn't sure I was right, but I did all the math today, and I was right. Assuming the Hurricanes carry one extra skater, one, and my guess is that it would be a forward, not a defenseman. If the Hurricanes carry one extra skater, the Hurricanes have just over $1 million in available cap space. I'm sorry, just over $9 million in available cap space. My intel, and I know I said going to be a little change from what I said about 10 days ago. My intel is that the number for Jarvis is not going to be north of $8 million, unless the Hurricanes get super generous here. And that is not necessarily their modus operandi. But my understanding is that number will be either 8 or a shade under 8 per year for 8 years. And it is going to be an 8-year deal. The two sides aren't even discussing 1 year at this point. It's not even an option. They both want 8, and they're close enough where it's going to happen. When? We've got time, but it's going to happen. So assuming Jarvis is, let's just say 8, then the Hurricanes would have just over $1 million in cap space if they carry one extra skater. Obviously, we eat into that if they carry 2 extra skaters, whether it's 2 forwards or one in a forward and a defenseman. And if they do that, that's fine. But the reason why you would carry just one extra skater is because with that $1 million or just a shade over $1 million in available cap space, you accumulate more cap room for whatever you might need to do, want to do at the trade deadline, since NHL salary caps are compiled daily. So that's my feeling about what they're going to do. I guess I wouldn't be completely shocked if they carried no extra skaters. They've done that before, but I think they're going to carry one at least, and it all depends on who that guy might be. If I had to guess, I would say the extra skater, or I would assume Brendan Lemieux is going to make the opening night roster. Whether he plays opening night or not, I think Brendan Lemieux will be here. I also think that all of those guys, Lemieux, Eric Robinson, Tyson Yost, they'll all be put on waivers. And if somebody claims them, then somebody claims them. But I think you might see 2 of them end up in Chicago with the Wolves to start the season. But I think Brendan Lemieux will be here in the opening night lineup. Rod Brindamore really wants him here, although I think a lot of his buddies are out of town. And Tony DeAngelo, best of my knowledge, has not been signed. So that's where I believe they are in terms of the cap. I believe that's where they are in terms of the cap. As for Jarvis, again, that will get done sooner rather than later. So, who plays with who is almost pointless to go through right now. I will tell you, and I've probably talked about it here before, I think Jesperi Kotkaniemi will get the first crack at second line center, barring something weird happening in terms of a trade, and I don't think anything like that is on the horizon for this team at this point. And I will say, coincidence or not, and I'm not a huge fan, everybody knows, I personally think Jack Drury is better than Jesperi Kotkaniemi, but KK is going to get the first crack because $4.82 million a year with 6 more years on it, I think it's 6 more years on it, kind of dictates your decision making. I think KK with Necas and Svechnikov might be the way the Hurricanes start the season. And I will take you back to the beginning of last year, not this year, the year before, and that line got off to a super fast start. Kotkaniemi didn't actually get a lot of points during that stretch, but Svechnikov and Necas did. And KK, I don't think KK was playing poorly at all. I just think he wasn't compiling a lot of points. Ultimately, Jesperi Kotkaniemi needs to be a consistently good player, and he really hasn't been. He isn't necessarily, I'm not saying he's a bad player, because I don't think he's a bad player, but he hasn't been consistently impactful, whether it's on the score sheet or just within the course of a game. He has been sporadic, and I know we'll look at his points, but if you go back 2 years ago when he had a better offensive season, a lot of those points, he probably had 4 or 5 multi-point games, and I'm not talking about just 2. Like he had some 3 and 4 point games in the year we had the outdoor games, so 2 years ago. So overall, I think there were something like 56 or 57 games where he didn't hit the score sheet at all. And you can't be a number 2 center on a good team and 65% of the games or more not hit the score sheet. There has to be some level of contribution on a night in, night out basis. You're not, look, Aho doesn't hit the score sheet, 75 times a year. But man, the number of games where Aho doesn't register a point, that ain't close to 60. So we need Kotkaniemi will have to be a more consistent player, especially if he is playing in your top 6. I would say the same thing about Jack Drury as I ramble here. But what have I said about Jack Drury? He's not a number 2 center. And my doubts going into the playoffs or even into before the trade deadline was that I can't close my eyes and see the Hurricanes winning a Stanley Cup if Jack Drury is playing second line center minutes. So the Hurricanes still have that problem. Unless Kotkaniemi becomes that guy, which I frankly don't think he is, but unless he becomes that guy, that's still an issue for Carolina going forward. But I still think they're a playoff team. All right. Let me just close on this. Awesome that the Hurricanes signed Eric Staal to the one-day contract so he could retire officially as a Hurricane. He is a retired NHL player now. He didn't play last year. He didn't play a couple of years ago when he wanted to, but he played for the Canadian Olympic team in Beijing. He basically is the Carolina Hurricanes offensive record book. He just is. Now, Sebastian Aho will one day have all of the records, every single one of them. But that does not diminish what Eric Staal has meant to this franchise. So I'm going to try to be quick here talking about Eric because he did not enjoy positive fan reaction. That's not a lie. Yes, of course, there were tons of Eric Staal fans, but boy, did they hold him to a standard that, yeah, he had a very big contract. Yeah, he was at one point a 100-point player. That was a pretty special team playing with that group in 2006. But he rarely played with elite players who played both ends of the rink like he did, and when he did, he produced. The 1 year, which was that the strike, the labor interrupted year, Alex Semin, Jeff Skinner, that line produced a lot of points, but ultimately he wasn't playing with elite players all the time. And that made it more difficult. On top of that, and I think people forget this, because I forget which year that Eric Staal went and played in the World Championships, because the Hurricanes weren't playing in the playoffs. And he suffered a knee injury on a dirty hit in a game against Sweden. Flat out dirty hit. And I think it took him maybe 2 years to fully regain. Maybe he never fully did regain his speed and his mobility. And I think for the most part, that kind of came and went. There were days he felt great and he looked the same old Eric Staal, and there were days he didn't. And he looked like he was an older player and a less effective player. But he was a great Hurricane. He was a champion. He scored tons of big goals. Man, go look at highlights. Shock at the Rock. Go look at Shock at the Rock. He was a great Hurricane. And it was sad when he left. He was kind of beaten down by losing. But I watched him become a captain before he was probably ready, and in an awkward circumstance where Rod Brindamore had the C taken from him and given to Eric. That was very uncomfortable. Very few poor decisions made by Jim Rutherford. I think that was one. Because just let it happen organically. It was going to happen anyway. Do it after the season. Not to mention how it made Rod feel. But I watched him grow into a great captain and a guy who was comfortable with who he was. A guy who loved playing with his brother. And I was probably more sad for Jordan when Eric left than I was for Eric that he had to go. And I think Jordan probably feels as good about what happened today, Tuesday, as Eric does. And at some point during the season, they have not announced yet when. Eric Staal will be honored. His jersey will be retired. It will go next to the 10 and the 17 and the 2 up in the rafters. And I'm assuming, if I know we have a Hall of Fame banner, but 14's got to go up and 30's got to go up. Those will all never be worn again by Hurricanes. So we don't have to worry, like, automatic Hall of Famer for the Hurricanes. Canes Hall of Famer. Last time I talked to Cam Ward about it, Cam Ward feels like he should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. We'll see. I mean, to me, Rod Brindamore goes in before Eric Staal, but that's another matter altogether. And we're not going to have that discussion right here. But thrilled that Eric Staal has retired as a Hurricane, and he will go into the Hurricanes Hall of Fame whenever we decide, because it's not even it's not going to be part of Hall of Fame night. It's going to happen earlier in the season. It's going to be a standalone event because his number's just being retired. They already announced that. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to talk to Eric, and a little plug for the day job. He will join me Thursday on the Adam Gold Show right out of the gate. So like 12:05 it's scheduled. On Thursday, we'll talk to Eric Staal. And there we are. Necas is back. Jarvis will follow. Real quick, if you want to just play around with figures, go look at Carolina's salary cap obligations for the 25-26 season. Not this year, but next year. I think Carolina is going to end up with about $20 million in available cap space and not needing necessarily to fill out roster spots. Look at the available free agents next summer, not this summer, not now, next summer, after this year. The Hurricanes are going to have money to spend, and my thought is that they're going to spend it. Because remember, this organization will use weaponized cap space, whether it's to make a trade or it's to go out and get stuff on the free. Because that's what you can do when you've got about $20 million in available cap space. All right. I got to go. We're brought to you by the Aluminum Company of North Carolina. If it's for the exterior of your home, you can find it at the Aluminum Company of North Carolina on Hamlin Road in Durham. No place like it. Sammy Hanna and his crew do a great job. I hope I didn't forget anything about Necas or about Jarvis or about Eric Staal. If I did, hit me up at AGoldFan on Twitter, and we'll have this conversation there as well. Until next time, whenever next time warrants, probably sometime next week, I am Adam Gold, and we will see you down the road.